Welcome to Afros and Audio's Black History Month interview series. My name is Talib Jasir, founder and CEO of Afros and Audio Podcast Festival, the first two-day conference for and by Black independent podcast creatives and audio professionals. I'm excited to spotlight 28 outstanding indie podcast creatives who answer the call to be a part of this series. Today, my guest is Stephane Shaw. Welcome and thank you for being here. How are you?
I am doing amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. I'm glad that you're here. So I want people to learn a little bit about you. We'll definitely talk about the podcast, but tell us a bit about Stephane.
Yeah, so I am mom, wife, and grandma. Get that part out of the way. But I also spent 20 years in corporate America in public affairs, business development, 10 years running a nonprofit. And the reason that I'm sitting in front of you today is because the last 2 years in a nonprofit, I got really sick. Just my body completely broke down due to the stress and working all the time and so forth. During that time, I went to 18 different doctors, 2 world-renowned medical facilities, over $20,000 out of pocket, trying to figure out what was going on in my body, why rapid heartbeat after I ate or numbness in my jaw and so forth. So all of that is what, again, put me where I am to now. I consider it my pain into purpose story. So that's just a little bit about my background.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm sure there are a lot of people, and that's why we talk to one another, because this community, in whichever way we identify and claim community, there's always folks that can have some relatability into everyone's story. We definitely know there are no stories that are alike. But there are stories that are relatable and people can gain something from. So I'm really ready to jump into your podcast because I definitely know that there are people out here that will benefit from the messages and the conversation. So please tell us when you started the podcast and knowing what it is, the title of it and that sort of thing.
Oh, sure. So first of all, one of the main reasons that I did start the podcast is because of my story. While I gave you like that 30-second overview, it was 2 years of a lot. Going to different doctors, being asked questions that weren't necessary because they weren't helping heal my body. And I, at that time, didn't know how to advocate for myself as a woman, as a Black woman, as a patient, as someone who didn't have any typical symptoms every day. So that's one of the reasons that I launched the podcast. While I was sick, I went back and got 2 nutrition coaching certifications. And I discovered that there's a lot of women who are similar or had similar situations to me. And I thought, what better opportunity to be able to bring to them how I actually healed my body over a podcast. So even though I went to all the Western medicine doctors and so forth, the only thing that I ultimately ended up doing was changing the way that I ate and changing my mindset and changing my diet. So that's exactly what the podcast does. From a holistic perspective, I interview OBGYNs and also naturopathic doctors, functional medicine doctors, specialists in sleep and mindset, anyone that can impact with science-based evidence, impact the overall life of a woman who may be in menopause. We talk about a bunch of stuff, sex and sexuality, what that looks like and feels like in menopause, and how women can make changes around nutrition, mindset, and so forth, so that they're able to live a more healthier life during the change. We talk about menopause in the workplace. It's very sad that in the United States, it's not addressed, and there's some shame around women who are going through this phase of their life. But in places like the UK, their HR departments and some of the major corporations in the UK actually have menopause workplace policies in place, so women aren't shamed by it, or they can't retribution can't be sought because they're feeling off or not being able to adjust. So during the podcast, we talk about that. What do you need to know in order to go to your supervisor or the HR department when you're going through this change of life? And I think it's so important. While it's geared toward women, I think the conversation also is important for men. So I've raised 3 men, my husband and I, and they are amazing. But the conversation about the change in a woman's life and even their cycle and how we change throughout a 30-day time frame, while men change every 24 hours. So even having those conversations with my boys became super important. So in the podcast, a lot of times I'll try to weave in, this is the conversation you should be having with your mate, with your spouse, with other men that are in your lives as well. And then we do a couple breakdown sessions just talking about what hormones are changing, like how our estrogen levels are decreasing, how testosterone and progesterone in our body are decreasing too. And while we know that in midlife, everything decreases and everything drops, we know that as women, but often what we don't talk about is the impact that it has on other parts of the body. So I was out to eat with some folks and they were eating a whole bunch of sugar and they start having hot flashes, but they're like, oh, it's just a little hot flash, I'll get over it. During the podcast and even in that conversation, what I want women to start thinking about, it's not just a little hot flash. It's not just your estrogen lowering. Other things are impacted. So when your estrogen begins to lower, you are also at higher risk for things like heart disease and osteoporosis. So 1 in 2 women over 20, African-American women, they have some type of cardiovascular disease. So while you think that eating sugar and that quick hot flash is okay, you may actually be causing other things to happen in your body. So the podcast talks about that. We're all about educating. And with almost every episode, I try to weave in advocacy too. I went to 18 different doctors and again, 2 world-renowned medical facilities, but I also had a ton of emergency room visits. And before they even got to my symptoms, they would ask me, are you stressed? Is there anything going on with you and your husband? I'm like, no, let's get to what's going on. Talk to me about what I'm talking to you about. Granted, those questions could be important in some situations, but I often felt as if because I was a woman, oftentimes, and me being a Black woman as well, when I would go into that, the conversations were never about my symptoms. It was like they were trying to align my symptoms with what they assumed would be the situation. So on the podcast, we also talk a ton about what does advocacy look like? How are you prepared before you step into that doctor's office? How are you prepared before you walk into the emergency room? Do you have your questions ready? Do you follow up? If a doctor tells you no, I'm advocating for my mom in a situation, and the doctor told her basically no about getting a nutritionist, I'm like, cool, say no, but I need for you to put that in writing. So things like that are conversations that are over and over we're having on the podcast. I have one coming up where there's a physician who at 40 was on the verge of suicide and decided I no longer can be a physician because I don't feel like I'm doing what I need to do for folks. So I'm making a switch in my life. She's now a drummer and a composer. And so even conversations like that coming up, what does that next phase of your life look like? So it's super exciting. I get very excited talking about the podcast. And again, there's a little bit for everyone.
Yeah, that's awesome. You said a lot and in a great way. A couple of stories came to mind for myself. One, I'm an older gentleman myself, and alcohol gets me my hot flashes, right? And
Yeah.
when you not already alcohol, that can just be by itself. But then when you think about the damage, the physiological aspects that are a domino effect inside of the body because of it was very eye-opening. So I appreciate you saying that because like you said, it's goes across gender. There is important things that we tend to, as people, one, we're laymen when it comes to medical information. And that's going to keep us in the dark, keep us ignoring things and say it'll go away. If it's not something that's immediate right there and it's not making me want to go to the emergency room, then I'm going to wait for it to pass. And it's detrimental in so many ways. So it's so important. I love this. And you didn't mention your podcast name, but it's great.
Did I?
So how did you come up with the name of the podcast?
Want me to really tell you how I came up with the name of the podcast?
Please.
Well, I come up with all my great ideas in the shower. I'm like, oh, I like that. So the name of the podcast is Hello Hot Flash. And so a lot of folks are like, hello, hot flash. Are you embracing this time? I'm like, yeah, this is a magical time. So you can look at it like that. You're embracing the time. You can also look at it with a little attitude like, hello, hot flash. I am not going to allow you to control me in midlife. So yes, the name is Hello Hot Flash. And from the perspective of this being a beautiful time, the way I like for women to look at it, like I have wrinkles now that equate to 32 years of marriage, or stretch marks that equate to 3 beautiful men. And I've actually been able to give seed to another generation with a grandchild. So I'm more bold in my conversations. I know what to say, what not to say. I'm in a different financial situation in my life. And so that's part of the conversation too. Like, yeah, we got hot flashes and we're gaining weight where we don't want to gain weight, and night sweats and hair is falling out and all that other junk is happening. But this is also a beautiful time where we've been able to mature and we know what we didn't know in the past. Hello, hot flash.
Nice, nice. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's again, I really enjoyed this conversation for so many reasons. And in the last few years, we've really been seeing more of a spotlight on the disparity for Black women, specifically in healthcare, when we talk about deaths and having children and just overall being ignored and judged and or not respected or heard. It's a national pandemic, and it has been for years. Like, we're only now becoming more aware of people saying, listen, it happened to me. Oh, it happened to me too. This has actually happened. I'm not tripping. I'm not sitting there talking to this doctor, telling him everything plainly, and then walking away feeling like they took nothing into consideration of what I said. And so talk a little bit about that and your podcast and the national conversation. How do you feel like those align, and what's the opportunity there?
Yeah. So even going back to the father of gynecology, Sims, all of his experiments were done on enslaved women. Those experiments were done without anesthesia. So there has been this long history of disrespect as it relates to and not listening to women. They were done without anesthesia because Black people don't feel pain. Okay, so this is ongoing. I think the best thing that I can do as a podcast host is to teach people how they begin to advocate for themselves. While we may be lay people, no one knows your body like you do. The way that you would have that attitude or that conversation or that sense of boldness when you're out in public and someone doesn't treat you right at the restaurant, or someone doesn't get the right, I don't know, clothes off the rack for you and bring it into the room. Wherever you have that sense of boldness, bring that into the doctor's office. Now, I'm not saying being disrespectful at all. I'm saying let them know that you are there, you want to be heard, and just a little bit or enough to be dangerous. So conversations like, go back to my mom's situation. The doctor she's Southern woman, has a thicker Southern accent. The conversations, every time he asked her a question, he would interrupt her and he'd just keep talking. And I could have gone a different direction with my energy, but I decided to stay where I needed to stay. I said that to him. I'm like, you know what? The questions you're asking are great, but in order for you to help her, you have to let her answer those questions. I'm telling you, it changed the complete tone, the conversation, the energy in the room. And I wasn't nasty. I just let him know that we're not here to be disrespected. We're here to be heard. So using your voice when you're in there. Also, start to journal. So if you're having a whole bunch of symptoms and so forth, I always step back and say, we need our doctors. They're amazing people. They are overworked. They have a lot of data that they need to input. And so sometimes they are running in and out of the room a lot. So I often say, if you get someone that's super ignorant, just go get another doctor. But a lot of times it may just be that they're just in a different zone. So in order to get them back on page with you, again, have your list of questions. What's going on? I'm feeling this and this. What can we do about this and that? And if they're refusing you, as I said earlier in the conversation, great. Can you put that in writing? A lot of times that gives them that wake up call. My mom's doctor, again, I had him put something in writing. I told his nurse to have him put it in writing. Guess what? That night, he called me on his personal cell phone to have a conversation with me. So again, advocating for yourself, I think helps. I don't believe that it's going to be difficult for us to change the way everyone feels, thinks, and acts. But when it comes to our own self, if we're advocating for ourselves and come prepared to the visit, then we can help move things forward.
Absolutely. And my next question for you to think about is really why podcasting. You could have taken this approach with any medium, right? For me, I know when we first got on a call, I mentioned I was in a meeting. I happened to work for pharma and I work for a creative agency. And so we're actually building a tactic right now about patient communication skill building and being willing to speak up, being the advocate for yourself, challenging this. So that's like my way of supporting the world of situations like that. And so when it comes to you and you decided, I have a message, I have a voice, these things need to be heard, why podcasting for you?
Yeah, so my background is in telecommunications. So I spent years in the industry, television, a little bit of radio, and I like to talk, yet I'm an introvert. So it all meshed together. Like, how can I get this message out to a lot of people? How can I get this message out to a lot of people at no cost to them? And how can it also fit my new lifestyle of being a midlife woman who wants to stay at home? So it just hit a whole bunch of different levels with me. And I thought that also it was something that was also quick to market, something that you can get out there. And it provided me an opportunity to interact with a lot of different people, get a lot of different perspectives. I call it my free therapy session because, I can't go to 52 different doctors a year, but I get these 52 really good conversations and I'm learning as well as me being able to provide that information to others.
That's awesome. That mutual benefit, hands
Yeah.
down, always the best part. So that leads right into the next question. And you answered this in the submission form, and I'd just love for you to expand on it. Since you started podcasting, how has your life changed and your ideas, your thoughts about things?
So I understood the role of advocacy, but I didn't understand it at the level I do now. So every conversation, no matter what we're talking about, I just started to see a pattern and it kept coming back to advocacy. So it's changed how I approach when I'm advocating for my parents, how I approach the conversations. That little hint about telling them to write it down. I learned that in an interview, things like that. So I think it's built strength for me around that. It's also helped me be more aware and stay on track with my own health. So every week you're talking to someone new about what you need to do and how you align your nutrition and so forth. When you keep hearing those messages over and over, you step up. You're like, I can't forget that. This is really important. So those are some of the ways that it's changed.
Yeah, that's super important. I remember back to like my particular career, and we had a behaviorist in one day, and he put on a list of demographics of people who are like the most healthiest out of this group of people. So they had young people and older men and older women and that sort of thing. And the interesting part was that older married men were the most supported and healthy because they had a wife stepping in and interceding on their behalf. And it literally was statistical that men who were married and they were older typically had better health care. That says in and of itself the disparity, right? And so the opportunity to not only advocate, because women advocate for the whole entire family. And unlike you, in a lot of ways, sometimes their own health gets put on the back burner. So I think it's really amazing. And I'm sure that as you have these conversations and you're learning, they're learning as well. And it's almost like the aha moment, like, oh yeah, I'm doing this work. I can also do this work for myself.
Yeah, yes, that's a big aha moment. And the reason I got to 2017 where I was so sick, because I didn't have these conversations before. I thought it was selfish to have self-care. I didn't realize working 60 plus hours a week was going to take my body out. You're exactly right. These conversations are simply amazing. I just meet some amazing people.
Awesome. How many episodes do you have so far? And are you seasonal? How do you approach it?
Yeah, Hello Hot Flash airs each Thursday. And this is hard for me to know because I'm always working ahead. So I'm caught up till May, but I think today episode 63 came out.
Wow, congratulations. That's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you see your podcast moving forward? You've done all these amazing conversations that can absolutely continue and it will be perfect for what you've created. As you've done this work and thought about expansion for yourself and for the podcast, what kind of visions are you having for 2023 and beyond?
Yeah, I'm trying to find the right partner. And I don't know what that partnership looks like. So I'm having conversations right now. One, of course, for the podcast message to expand and get more people listening in, but also it feels as if there has to be something else. And in all honesty, I don't know what that is right now. Is it working with a company who is working on advocacy? Is it working with a more holistic brand so that we can offer holistic products to women that will help them during the menopause phase? So I'm actually in that phase right now, trying to figure out what that all looks like so we can make sure that this has some longevity.
Absolutely. One of the things that I realize, and I work on and producing biopics and fictional stories, but one of the things that I realize is that the podcast and specific topics can be used as a resource in different organizations. Always, whether you license it, you let them, or it's free and you let them play it or provide it to members of the organization or faculty for training purposes and stuff like that. There are so many opportunities. I love audio so much because for me, it's a cornerstone. Anything can be built from it.
Yeah.
And so that's great. I love that.
That's an amazing idea. I hadn't thought about that. This week we got picked up by a radio station. So it's a 24/7 radio station. So they'll use our weekly episodes to help fill airtime. So I hadn't even thought about that as an opportunity as well in the past, but thinking about it using its training, that's another great idea. So I'm writing that down.
Definitely. That's what we're here for. So that's awesome. Is there anything that you would like to promote besides the podcast?
Yeah, so of course, the podcast. And then in March, I'm launching a course called Mastering Menopause. And folks will be able to find the information for the course on the website. The website is hellohotflash.com/training. So we'll have that information there for people on when they can get the course.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. And the other story I was going to share that I was like, should I share? Should I not? Well, anyway, we could cut it if necessary. My Nana-in-law, when I first met her, and it's 17 years ago, they would all talk about Nana and her menopause and how it was a chore to be around her at the time. But what was funny about it was that when Nana finally talked to me about her menopause, she said, no one even knew I was going through menopause. And I'm like, your whole family avoided you for years. But the point of that is that embracing what's happening, right? Because that denial keeps you out of your HCP's office. It keeps you out of advocating for yourself. And like, listen, give me some grace.
Yeah, exactly.
All of this. So that's happening. And so it's really important that these conversations happen. Because when I looked at Nana, like, okay.
They knew, Nana. They knew.
So yeah, I really appreciate this conversation. And I know it's going to be helpful for so many, not only our interview, but listening to the podcast. You have a lot of great content. I've listened to a few episodes and I love what I hear because it is for me as well. I have a mother, I have a wife, I have a twin sister. This is going to impact in place in my life as well. And it's important. It really is important for us to have a level of awareness, understanding, so that people aren't just saying, Nana crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Nana's going through something.
Yeah. 30-second comment. So for the men who are listening and saying, yeah, no, this isn't for me. On another podcast, there was a gentleman who he and his wife got a divorce. He went to some conference. They were talking about menopause. He was like, oh, that's what was wrong with her. And they actually remarried. Do you know what I mean? So it's important that the men also know what's going on in this situation.
Absolutely. It's so important. It really is. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to more about you, having you more part of the community as well, and simply to support and provide any resources that we can. But this has been great. You've done some amazing work, and however we can be here to support and build community around you as well, we're here for it.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So I'm going to close this out and then I'll just ask you to stay right there with me, okay?
Okay, great.
All right, so I want to give a big thanks to our Afros in Audio and Black podcast community for supporting our commitment for community and collaboration. If you'd like to join the Black Podcast Association, the link will be in the description below. If you want to join us at the 5th annual Afros in Audio Podcast Festival, visit bit.ly AFAQ, which will also be in the description. Follow us on all social media channels at Afros in Audio. Thanks again, Stephane Shaw, for being a part of Afros in Audio's first ever Black History Month interview series. And before I let you go, please tell everyone where they can find you, and it will also be in the description of the video.
Yes, you can find all of my social links and on podcast episodes on hellohotflash.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephane.
Thank you.